it goes right to that theme of empowerment. I want them from day
Yeah.
one to realize that we're on this journey together. It's a team effort. I'm always looking for opportunities for things that they can do to help accelerate their recovery, to help improve their process. When I look for ways to demonstrate to them clinically, or objectively that things are improving, because sometimes it's not always clear at first that things are happening. That's where ultrasound imaging, strength testing, mobility testing, you know, reviewing various reactivities and such help people to understand the progress they're making. Because as anyone who's been through a chronic pain issue will tell you, like, in the beginning it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell when you go from like a 9 out of 10 to a 7 out of 10 pain, that like there's some improvement in the pain, but not all the time. It's easier when you're, say halfway there to be like, oh, wow, like I'm much better now, but you can't always see it in the beginning.
This is True Voice Unfiltered, the podcast where raw truth meets real transformation. I'm your host, Daria Anne, ghostwriter, content strategist, and holistic health warrior. No, I'm not a doctor, nurse, nutritionist, or any kind of medical professional, and this show does not dispense medical advice. I'm just an informed patient sharing what I've learned on my own healing journey. I also interview accomplished authors, speakers, entrepreneurs, and functional medicine practitioners who are transforming lives. If you're ready to break free from the sick care system, reclaim your health, and transform your life, you're in the right place. Let's get unfiltered. Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 45 of True Voice Unfiltered. Wow, do I have an amazing guest for you today. His name is Dr. Sean Altman, and he is a functional medicine doctor and orthopedic expert, specializing in chronic pain, regenerative orthopedics, bioelectric signaling, and energy medicine. And he has his own amazing, incredible story. And I want to share a little bit about that now. And then when I bring him on, we're going to delve into it a little bit more. He says, what led me to this work was not some abstract academic curiosity. It was confusion. And honestly, it was the experience of being failed by the very system that was supposed to help me. We've all been there, right? I lived through years of chronic pain, fatigue, injuries, neurologic symptoms, migraines, and normal tests that never came close to explaining what I was actually going through. Sound familiar to anyone out there? And I know that experience is not unique to me. Dr. Altman says millions of people are told some version of the same thing. Your labs look fine. Your imaging is normal. Maybe it's stress. Meanwhile, their body is screaming that something is wrong. He says, for me, that disconnect became impossible to ignore. I had a childhood infection that contributed to chronic Lyme disease. I battled undiagnosed fibromyalgia. I had concussions from hockey, trauma from car accidents, and then during one especially brutal stretch of fatigue and vertigo, I collapsed walking into work and sustained major orthopedic injuries on top of everything else. That became a reckoning, because at some point you realize that if the system keeps telling you that you're okay while your life is clearly falling apart, then either the system is missing something or it's asking the wrong questions. And in chronic pain, I believe that happens all the time. One of the most important moments in my life came during medical training when I heard the Carl Sagan quote, "The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence." That hit me like a lightning bolt because that was my life. Just because a standard test failed to reveal the answer did not mean that the suffering wasn't real. It meant that we had not looked deeply enough. It meant that the model was incomplete. And once I realized that, I stopped waiting for permission to think differently. I started looking at healing through a much wider lens. Structure, chemistry, nervous system function, and energy. That's really where the Altman method began. That journey pushed me toward functional medicine, but also beyond functional medicine alone, because this was never just about labs for me. It was never just about supplements, and it was never just about one joint, one scan, or one diagnosis. My background in molecular biology taught me to think at the cellular level. My training as a physical therapist taught me to think mechanically and structurally. Functional medicine helped me connect hormones, nutrients, inflammation, metabolism, and physiology. But what really changed everything was realizing that pain persists when systems do not communicate properly. So instead of asking only, where does it hurt? I began asking,
Why is the body not healing? What system is stuck? What signal is missing? That is the question that drives everything I do. And that is why I am so passionate about this topic, because I know what it feels like to be dismissed. I know what it feels like to live in a body that makes no sense on paper. And I know how powerful it is when someone finally helps you understand that you are not crazy, you are not weak, and you are not broken beyond repair. Very often, you are just misdiagnosed, misunderstood, or missignaled. Once you start to see pain that way, the entire healing conversation changes. And boy, I think so many of us can relate to that. How many of us have been told your labs are normal? Everything's fine. It's all in your head, or you're just aging, right? So I think, I mean, I've certainly been there. I know a lot of my audience has been there. But what's so exciting to me is that, I have interviewed chronic pain patients in the fight for kratom. And when I received Dr. Sean Altman's bio and all of his information and was, perusing his website in preparation for this interview, I realized, wow, he actually gets to the source of the pain. So maybe uh, if more patients could find someone like him and actually address the root cause, there's that root cause word again, the root cause of their pain and start feeling better, they won't need to take anything else. So that's a longer conversation, but it just occurred to me as I was preparing for this interview today, because I have, as you know, I have done a few episodes on kratom. I've had a kratom panel. I've interviewed Misty Brown and John Shinholzer, kratom activists, and I certainly align with them in their fight to keep kratom legal. And when I saw Dr. Altman's information, I thought, wow, how much better would it be, though, if these people could get root cause healing, the kind that Dr. Altman provides. So let me just read his bio, and then we're going to get this interview started. Dr. Sean Altman is a functional medicine doctor and orthopedic expert specializing in chronic pain, regenerative orthopedics, bioelectric signaling, and energy medicine. His work focuses on identifying the true root cause of pain and restoring the body's internal communication system so healing can resume naturally and durably. He has spent more than 15 years helping patients with complex chronic pain, orthopedic and spine injuries, migraines, fibromyalgia, neurologic conditions, autoimmune issues, and other cases that often do not respond to conventional treatment. Dr. Altman is the creator of the Altman method, a systems-based framework that evaluates healing through 4 major lenses: structure, chemistry, nervous system function, and energy. His approach is designed to uncover why pain remains stuck, even when scans appear normal, and to build a personalized treatment sequence that supports lasting repair rather than temporary symptom relief. His clinical work integrates advanced diagnostics and regenerative therapies, including musculoskeletal ultrasound, alt point, percutaneous needle electrolysis, frequency-specific microcurrent, laser therapy, shockwave therapy, dry needling, and manual therapy. Through this precision-based approach, Dr. Altman helps patients reduce pain, improve stability and function, and in many cases, avoid unnecessary surgery. Well, that sounds good to me. So without further delay, let's go talk to Dr. Sean Altman. Dr. Sean Altman, welcome to True Voice Unfiltered. I am so excited to have you here today.
So am I. Thank you so much for having me.
So, Dr. Sean, you are really the first guest I've had who combines functional medicine with orthopedics and so many other things. And I read your true voice story and your bio for the audience, but I would really love for you to kind of take us back to that day when you finally had sort of that aha moment when you were like, the system is not helping me. I got to go in a different direction.
Absolutely. So my history, as a child, I suffered from Lyme disease. I'm a ice hockey player, so I had a number of concussions, and some car accidents as a kid. And that really crystallized into this chronic pain, migraine, headache, vertigo, really challenging symptoms. And for years, I saw various doctors in different specialties. It really inspired me to like want to pursue a field in medicine because I was trying to uncover my own problems. And I enjoyed that puzzle, that search. But ultimately, after roadblock after roadblock, realizing that there really wasn't an answer for the symptoms I was dealing with. And I continued to get lab tests done that said that there was nothing wrong, MRIs, CAT scans, etc. I realized that there had to be more to what was going on, and it just made me realize the fact that the testing I was doing, it had its limits. And that's really where I started to discover functional medicine, and I started to study, more about the systems of the body, how they interrelate, how do they work with one another. And I really like that began this sort of lifelong pursuit for understanding how our bodies work as a system, how all those systems interact with one another. Um, and it quite honestly saved my life. It helped me find answers for my own issues. And, I feel privileged and, very happy about the opportunity that I have to share that with the world, to share that with others who are suffering. And to tell them that, number one, there is something going on, even if the tests say that they're fine. They're not lying. They're not making it up. The test just
Yeah.
hadn't caught or they don't have the sufficient detail or technology to detect it. But it doesn't mean that we can't find the answer, and to work on it together. And I really try to bring that emphasis to my work, which is, what I would call like empowerment. I want my patients, my colleagues, everyone working with me to feel like they're a part of the process. They're not sitting on the sidelines. They can help themselves. Once we figure out what's going on, I try to find strategies, lifestyle changes, things that they can do to help get the control back, to help get themselves better. Because I know what it's like to feel helpless. I know what it's like to feel like there's nothing you can do and no one's going to help you and you're stuck. You're stuck in this painful, challenging state, where no one has any answers. And I don't want others to suffer from this like I did.
Well, Dr. Sean, that's amazing. I think there are so many people who feel gaslit by conventional medicine, by the insurance system, whatever the system, whatever you want to call it. And not to pick on, I always try not to pick on practitioners so much as it's a systemic problem. But when you're
Absolutely.
told over and over again, and I was in this situation too, oh, your labs are normal. Oh, you feel like crap. Well, you're just getting older or you just have to live with it. And the thing that's so great about you is that you can literally say to your patient, I understand how you feel and I can help you. You can, and it means something because you've been there yourself. I mean, that is just incredible. And I was watching some of your patient testimonials on your website, and man, I was just, it's incredible. I mean, you've helped people resolve fibromyalgia, orthopedic issues. So let's talk a little bit about that too, like some of the types of issues you work with that you can help people with.
Absolutely. I mean, everything from, like you said, from fibromyalgia, so nerve pain, chronic, nervous system issues. So like something we would call like dysautonomia, where, you're stuck in this fight or flight situation. Your sympathetic nervous system is overstimulated. That's especially one that comes up a lot because those are patients who have had pain for a period of time. And then they exhibit symptoms that really don't show up on tests. They have like elevated heart rate, elevated blood pressure, anxiety, etc. And then they unfortunately get put down like the psychiatry route, but
Yeah.
ultimately that type of anxiety, that type of stress it's chemical, it's biological. There when you have a chronic pain situation, so that's anything more than 3 or 4 months, your body starts to naturally produce more cortisol, more adrenaline. The body becomes overstimulated. So it has nothing to do with you being like mentally anxious about anything. It's a systemic problem. And when you start looking at the body, in terms of that perspective systemically, there are, elegant and, very natural ways to, I like to use the word recalibrate. So basically getting the body to, you know, get back to a more homeostatic version of itself where it's in balance and it's not as overstimulated. And what I'm trying to do in a larger sense with my work is really to like bring research and science to the forefront of these things, to essentially to prove the merit of these types of treatments. We have for a long time classified a lot of the things that I do as like alternative medicine. But the reality is it's only classified as that because we don't have a lot of scientific proof or backing behind it. But the good thing is that there are people like myself and others out there that are doing the work, that are looking into the research and, proving the merit of these treatments and demonstrating that they actually do things. So in terms of other cases I work on is a lot of orthopedics. So people with orthopedic injuries, anything from like a meniscus tear, rotator cuff tear, spine instability. A big one is what we call craniocervical instability. So that would be, people who have had like whiplash and injuries to their spine. And basically, I utilize these modalities to get people to heal. And I track it along the way. I use ultrasound, X-ray, MRI. I use validated, methods in order to prove that these things are actually working. And hopefully that will pave the way for these treatments to become more mainstream. And that's really, I would say, my larger goal is to change the way the system works, to get more recognition and acceptance of these treatments, and even just of this way of thinking, so that many more patients can, enjoy this type of approach.
Yeah. Why are so many people dismissed, do you think, by conventional medicine or by the system?
I think it's largely just to do with their training, the way medical doctors are trained, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's a very black and white system. Everyone has their lane. There's a lot of specialties and certainly like subspecialization these days. And they only know a certain amount about a certain issue, and it doesn't cross over into other fields. And unfortunately, a lot of injuries, illnesses, etc., they take up more than two boxes. It's not, very rare is it unless it's just like a general traumatic injury, like say an ankle sprain. That's pretty clear. It's a ligament injury. That falls in one box. But someone who has chronic ankle pain, well, that can be coming from a number of sources. It can be coming from repetitive stress from activity. It can be coming from biomechanics, the way the body works. Sometimes it's the joint above or below that's affecting, a particular area. And once we start to get into that, then traditional medicine really is not equipped to deal with those issues. I'm sure, most of the viewers are, familiar with, these orthopedic clinics where they have, the ankle specialist, the knee specialist, the shoulder specialist,
Mhm.
spine specialist. Well, the problem is what happens if you have problems in two areas or three areas, or in my
Mm.
experience working with, complex patients, I work with patients that have, six or seven joints with pain in the traditional system, uh, they would have to see a doctor every day to get anywhere with that. And that's where I find that, an integrated approach where we look at the body as a whole, is really the only way to help those people, because otherwise, we can just drain months and months of time, and if not years, trying to chip away at each individual joint when in reality they're all connected.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. It's very segmented, and it's funny. I have a good friend who's a foot and ankle specialist, but yeah, you're right. I mean, they even within the orthopedic field, they break everything down into these specialties, and it seems like the patient has to go to one doctor for this, another doctor for that, and they're going all over the place, and they don't. Conventional medicine just has never really looked at the body as interconnected, like you said. So you created. I want to talk about your Altman method because that is
Yeah.
your signature framework. So can you tell us all about that?
Sure, sure. So the Altman method, I break down the body into four systems, and this is based off of the framework of functional medicine, but just with an like more of an added orthopedic emphasis. So I look at the body as four systems: structure, chemistry, the nervous system, and energy. And all of those systems interact with one another. Um, and often, with the majority of patients, one or more of those systems is not functioning properly. And that's what's getting them stuck in this chronic pain state. or this inability to get better or heal from an injury. Sometimes it's structural, sometimes it's a significant injury, like, a large rotator cuff tear. Sometimes it's the nervous system. The nervous system very often is playing a role. So we talked about earlier, like a emphasize, overstimulated nervous system. So that would be the sympathetic nervous system. So if the sympathetic nervous system is overstimulated, if our heart rate, blood pressure, everything is elevated, our adrenaline's elevated, cortisol's elevated, we are not in a state that's conducive to healing. Meaning that, even if we throw the best possible treatment at a person, if they are in that state, their body is not gonna respond well to it. And they're gonna get either no outcome, and that's what happens sometimes is people will not heal in response to particular treatments, or at the very least, a poor outcome, because their body is not going to accept the stimulus and respond appropriately. So getting the nervous system into the appropriate state where it's in more balanced, is really essential. And that dovetails into something that a lot of functional medicine doctors talk about, which is sleep. Sleep
Yeah.
is vital for recovery, but also for healing. So if someone is not getting adequate sleep, they're not able to rest and regenerate and repair whatever systems, whatever injuries that they're nursing. And that can play a huge role in terms of the chronicity. So the continued issue that people are dealing with. Obviously, you're not going to have an orthopedic appointment where the orthopedist asks you, "How are you sleeping?"
No.
Because that doesn't really fall in their box. However, that could be a huge part of why someone is not getting better. They could have a chronic spine issue with inflammation, and if they're tossing and turning and their sleep is poor every night, even with the best treatment, that may be enough of a stimulus to prevent them from getting better entirely. And,
Yeah, that's amazing.
and that's where these things are essential, and you have to look at the body and all of these elements to really make sure that you're not missing something. The other thing I we talk about is chemistry. So chemistry is, the various hormone levels, how the body works. I know, when I looked into it, I did read your book, and
Yeah.
that we you talked about things like the thyroid hormone and, how the body's endocrine system and body works as a whole. And those hormones, and many other endocrine systems are essential in terms of the way they work, because if they're not working properly, if your metabolism is too slow or too fast, that also impairs the healing process. And,
Yeah.
as you alluded to in your book, the general lab work is not always precise or specific enough to pick up on these little discrepancies, these little issues. Um, you know, uh, one of these quotes that was also kind of an aha moment that came up when I was in medical training was, Carl Sagan said, "The absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence." So basically, not being able to find something on a specific test doesn't mean that there isn't a problem. It just means that the test, is not sensitive or specific enough to determine it or to catch it. Um, and that's sort of how I live my life and how I approach treatment of patients as I meet everyone with open eyes, open arms. I want to hear their story. I want to know what's going on. I look at the medical information, and then I break it down into these systems, and I look for what's missing. Like why is this not working? What could we be missing in terms of this equation, in terms of why they're not getting better.
That's amazing. So do you order lab work depending
Mhm.
on the person, like,
Yep.
based on what you suspect is going on?
Yes, I order lab work, and I review lab work, but I try to do it with a real element of precision. I want to review all of their information and, be as precise as possible. Obviously, there's a lot of labs out there. You think of like Function Health and a lot of these other, functional lab companies, and the lab work,
Ulta, one.
it's
Yeah.
expensive. It's not covered by insurance. So I think the key really is to narrow down, what specific labs need to be done instead of doing a lot of labs and spending a lot of money. And the labs are really just indications of what area to go in. So it's first figuring out, like, looking at the big picture, determining what the main root cause might be, and then, maybe confirming it with lab work. I think that's the best approach instead of just testing, like, everything under the sun,
Sure.
and then trying to figure it out from there. Um,
Yeah, it's kinda like being an investigative a little detective, I should say, like a
yeah,
health detective, looking for the
absolutely.
clues. And yeah, and I've always appreciated that, like, every practitioner like you that I've worked with has always said, "Let's start here, and let's just see if we can figure it out here," and because I pay for everything myself too, and some of these labs, like you said, are not covered, and the patient may have to pay out of pocket. So I appreciate because you see these biohackers online, and I mean, it's great, all these the Dutch test and this test and all these expensive tests, and they're wonderful if the person needs them. But I always appreciate it. Everybody I work with kind of starts with some of the basic blood tests first, to see if we can identify the problem that way and move on from there. So that's a good point. So Dr. Sean, I want to ask you because you talk about the body's internal communication systems, and you
Mhm,
may have alluded to it, but I kind of want you to explain it in terms that listeners can understand.
absolutely. So a lot of my approach centers upon the concept of feedback. So the way that the body works and communicates with itself is through bioelectric signals. We've confirmed this, via research that, electrical signals are sent from cell to cell, atom to atom, and that generates the expression of genes, the production of protein, and the electric signals are by, their energy, and that's what we talk about when we talk about like energy flowing through the body. And really it's the change in flow of energy that generates these potentials and this, these micro level changes in how our body works. So, what I try to do with my therapies is to create essentially positive feedback loops, to send frequency based messages, which is how frequencies are how the cells communicate with one another with these electric signals, to promote the right expression of genes, the right pathways, the right movement in the right direction, to help a person get better. And this way, it's more of a facilitating effect as opposed to forcing it to happen. I'll use like a very classic example, which many of the viewers may be familiar with. So, like, a lot of you have probably heard of the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve, emanates from our upper neck area, and it's the regulator of our parasympathetic nervous system. So that's the opposite of the sympathetic we talked about earlier. So there are different ways to approach vagal dysfunction. Vagal dysfunction is that classic example we talked about earlier, where people are overstimulated, they don't have enough parasympathetic activity. So you could just increase vagus nerve tone. So that would be like these vagus nerve stimulators that, have become very popular on the market. Pulsetto, and there's a number of them, and now they're even starting to implant them surgically. But that's really only just stimulating it. So it's not necessarily fixing the system. It's just like hacking. It's biohacking. It's trying to like control how that thing works. What I try to do is send signals to the vagus nerve and even to the sympathetic nervous system to balance each other out. So that they're more, evened out. It's not upregulating one. It's more like, increasing vagus function and decreasing sympathetic function. So this way they meet in the middle, and then you're more in a homeostatic balanced state. And when we're able to accomplish that, then the body functions on its own, and you don't need to walk around with a vagus nerve stimulator. You don't need to have an implanted surgical device in your neck, which to me sounds a little bit uncomfortable. Um,
Me
you know,
too.
and that's really just a metaphor for all of the other things we can do. We can retrain our gut in terms of how the gut processes things. And by doing this, you're helping the body to help itself. You're helping the body to function, as it was designed to. And if there's one thing that I've learned, it's that our bodies, you know, evolved over thousands of years and are, very intelligently designed. Our body often knows what it wants to do or what it's trying to accomplish. There's just like one or two things in the way. Um,
Yep.
and I'm sure a lot of us have had those moments where, a specific treatment or a massage or something has just like magically made something get better. And the reality of that is on like a neurochemical level, on a, more scientific level, it wasn't the treatment that was like that powerful that made it happen. It was like your body had already sort of assembled all the things needed to accomplish the task. There was just like one roadblock in the way, and that treatment removed that roadblock. And then bam,
Yeah.
it succeeded. Um, and, I love thinking of it that way and explaining it that way because it goes right back to that theme of empowerment, like that the body is doing all of these things. The medication didn't do it. The surgery didn't do it. It, it was a catalyst. And that really makes us recognize how amazing and powerful we are as people, as humans.
Yeah, it's funny. My dad, he passed away a few years ago, but he was a general and vascular surgeon. And he always told me the body heals itself. I just pointed in the right direction. And for him, though, he was a man of faith. And he said, being a doctor actually strengthened his faith because the body is such an incredible machine. Like in his, for him, who else could have created this except God or a higher, higher power? So it's pretty amazing to hear you say that. And myself, I was always amazed too. Like, well, first of all, it's like always a combination. For me, it was always a combination of things. It wasn't any one thing that helped me optimize my thyroid and the other hormones. It was sort of like a combination of everything, including food, which I want to ask you about.
Yeah.
Sleep, supplements. Obviously taking the thyroid replacement on an empty stomach and waiting an hour, like following the protocols that I need to follow. But I feel like it was a combination of things, and now I'm just on this. It's just a routine, and it's there's nothing really disciplined about it because it's like, I want to keep feeling great. I know this is what I have to do to keep feeling great. So I want to ask you with your patients too, like, what do you ask of them? Because I know that patient participation in this type of medicine is crucial too.
Absolutely. No, and that's why it goes right to that theme of empowerment. I want them from day
Mm.
one to realize that we're on this journey together. It's a team effort. I'm always looking for opportunities for things that they can do to help accelerate their recovery, to help improve their process. When I look for ways to demonstrate to them clinically, or objectively that things are improving, because sometimes it's not always clear at first that things are happening. And that's where ultrasound imaging, strength testing, mobility testing, reviewing, uh, various like reactivities and such help people to understand the progress they're making. Because as anyone who's been through a chronic pain issue will tell you, like in the beginning, it's hard to tell when you go from like a 9 out of 10 to a 7 out of 10 pain, that like there's some improvement in the pain, but not all the time. It's easier when you're, say halfway there to be like, oh, wow, like I'm much better now, but you can't always see it in the beginning. So I'm always looking for ways to elucidate that and track it. And going to like your discussion of your father, one of the most interesting things I've seen from a vascular standpoint, because vascular stuff is something I deal with as well. I'll have patients who have chronic swelling in a particular area, and inflammation is just like one symptom. Inflammation can
Yeah.
come from many different sources. It can come from injury. It can come from poor blood flow, vascular issues. It could come from lymphatic issues, from the lymphatic system not working adequately in that area. And one of the things I've seen, which I think is quite remarkable, is what's called angiogenesis. So that's the body's generation of new blood vessels in an area. And that happens with the help of energy modalities, namely laser and shockwave. And after a certain period of time, you can actually literally see on ultrasound that new blood vessels have grown and filled in
Oh,
that
that's cool.
area.
Yeah.
And done it completely autonomously, non-surgically. Like the body did it. And I
Amazing.
think it's amazing to know that the body is capable of that. Um, and to be able to show that to a person. And I think it's an important thing to know in terms of treatment for vascular issues, because I see some people, getting a lot of like, we would call it like vein ablations, where they're trying to get rid of bad veins that are leading to inflammation or, lymphedema type issues, where there are other pathways that, can help you rebuild or repair those damaged veins. They just don't fall into the traditional medicine mindset.
Yeah, I mean, it's just incredible how the body just can. I mean, when you were talking about the blood vessels, you can see them kind of regenerate. I mean, I think that is so cool. I love that. So yeah, obviously this is very different from what people are used to. And when people come in, though, where do you kind of start when a patient comes in? I guess it's going to depend on what their issue is, but where do you generally like to start with them? Because it sounds like you address everything. Do you also address sort of like the emotional aspects of things that might be going on in their life that might be a
Absolutely.
driver? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I
Mm.
I wanna get their full history, when did this start? Prior issues, prior injuries, prior illnesses. I'm always screening for things that are gonna affect the gut, the immune system, anything that's gonna affect the body's ability to heal, to make sure that there aren't larger issues at bay. And then I wanna get into the specifics of the injury, the area that's bothering them, and then, as you said, the mental emotional component as well. Because major injuries carry with it trauma, you know,
Yeah.
and that can be a part of their recovery as well. So one of the things I work on with patients is called the somatic part of the pain. So, from a standpoint, like from a more layman standpoint, that would be like muscle guarding. So, if you've had a serious injury to an area or multiple injuries to that area, especially the muscles around that area, the body around that area is going to be naturally tense and protective around it because it's fearful of pain. It's fearful of another injury to that area. So part of the treatment is once we've helped that area to heal and decrease the inflammation, improve blood flow in and out of that area, now there's that layer of getting those muscles around it to relax and to let go so that the person can fully move and feel better. And it has to be done in this sequence. We have learned that in a lot of cases, I would say probably the majority of cases, with injuries, muscle tension is functional, it's protective. There's a term called trigger point or, muscle spasm, that many of you may be familiar with. Well, we've created a new term which we call a protective spasm or a protective trigger point. And what we have learned, and the ultrasound has been very helpful in elucidating this, is that beneath chronic tight muscles, there's often a pathology, there's often an injury under the surface. And this goes back to that theme of the body being so intelligent, where it knows that there's an injury under the surface, and it knows that if it keeps that muscle tight, it will minimize the pain and stress on that area. And a lot of you may have that and not even know it. The classic example is someone has chronically tight, say, neck and shoulders, and they go for a massage, and they feel good after the massage, but the next day they feel worse. And the reason for that is because there's an underlying injury in either the neck or shoulder area, and the body is tensing up those muscles to protect it from hurting more. Um, and
Interesting.
and ultimately, the best way to treat that is to treat the issue under the surface, the root cause of that muscle tightness, why it's tight, and then a lot of the muscle tightness will actually go away on its own, and whatever's residual, that somatic component, we can use feedback, we can use bioelectric signals to tell the body it's okay to let go. And it works really, really well. And because we do it in that sequence and that structured process, it doesn't wax and wane, at that, I try to time it so that the body is ready to let go. So it's not gonna just tense
Mhm.
right back up. And if you listen to the body, it will tell you.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, and I guess it's going to differ for every patient, but how long do they generally, like in a situation like you just described, how long does it generally take before the body is fully healed?
So I mean, it depends on the complexity of the issue.
Yeah.
But the majority of my patients, if I had to give like a time window, usually within, about 2 months, um, you know,
Great.
you know, maybe 12 weeks if it's a really chronic issue. And usually within 2 or 3 weeks, there's a significant improvement. So it once we're able to nail down what the root of the issue is, and we start addressing that, things start to really move in the right direction.
Amazing. And then, so then after that, Dr. Sean, let's say it takes them 2 months and they feel great. Then would you recommend like they could go for a massage regularly, like once
Absolutely.
you've dealt with the main issue? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, then, I have patients go on essentially what we call a maintenance program where, they continue to live a healthy lifestyle, they exercise, take supplements if needed, try to eat a relatively clean diet, although no one's perfect.
Okay.
Um, you know, and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
do the things that they can to keep themselves feeling healthy. And none of that happens unless we really emphasize this empowerment process, this patient engagement process throughout the treatment. Um, because if that's emphasized, then at the end they realize, okay, like now I'm better and now I have the tools to stay better.
Right.
And that's really what I want people to understand is that, you know, I want to give you the tools. Like as I like to say, you are the medicine, you
Oh,
know.
I love that. Yeah. No, it's true. And I think unfortunately we've been conditioned to like outsource our health to our doctor and just put all the burden on the doctor to fix everything and like here's this prescription. And
Mhm.
that's what I love about this kind of medicine is that because it puts the patient in control. But the flip side of that is the patient has to take that responsibility and do what they need to do on their end, even as they're healing with you, and then beyond that to maintain. And
Yeah.
I love that.
And not everyone's equipped to do it. It depends
Yes.
on
True.
the person.
Yeah.
Um, but what I find is, by emphasizing that right away, the people who stay with me, they're engaged, they're interested, they want to get themselves better. So ultimately at the end, and that's why I would say knock on wood, I really don't have those types of issues with people kind of falling off and having issues in the future is because they've signed up. They're involved, they're ready to meet the demands of getting themselves better. But I
But
spoke with someone the other day and I could tell right away she was not the type of patient who would prescribe to this type of method. This is a patient we, determine has some sort of autoimmune issue, gut issue, some detoxification issues. And I talked to her about even us before us starting treatment. I said, that doing infrared sauna would be very beneficial for her problems. So I'm sure you're familiar. Infrared sauna is
yes.
really excellent with detoxification. It has an anti-inflammatory effect, and it helps to modulate the way our gut works and our nervous system as well. So I explained this to her. She goes to a gym. She happens to have access to an infrared sauna. When I gave her a protocol, I said, you have to do it 3 to 4 times a week, 30 to 40 minutes each time. And I think that would be a good place to start, in terms of managing some of your symptoms. And she looked right back at me and she said, I don't really have that much time. Can I just take
Oh
the
man.
medication? And I was like,
Yeah.
okay, if you're not if that is the route you would like to go, that, then, the door's that way, so to speak.
Sure. Well, no, it's great that you have sort of that qualification process because this does require the patient's participation, this kind of medicine.
Yeah.
So it's really good. So, Dr. Sean, I want to go back to a couple of things, if you don't mind, because you
Yeah,
mentioned the
absolutely.
gut, and we hear a lot about the gut. Can you just explain what we mean by gut and how that drives our health one way or the other?
Absolutely. So I won't get into like too much depth, but the gut or the microbiome, our digestive system, 70 to 80% of our immune system is housed within our gut. So that dictates how our body responds to pathogens, toxins, you know, everything that goes in and out of our body, and even the environment around us. So having I wouldn't say perfect, but an ideal gut microbiome balance and a more regulated and balanced immune system really makes the body run more efficiently. And it can even be a source of like preventing you from getting better from an orthopedic issue. because if the gut is creating increased inflammation or even just increased energetic demand on our system, that's less resources available for the body to heal. It's useful to
Yeah.
think of the body and just energy as a whole as like a closed system. There's a certain amount of energy, certain amount of gasoline in the system, and it gets allocated to different, systems based on need and even based on like efficiency, how those systems work. So if you have systems of the body that are working very poorly and a lot of resources have to be allocated to them, now there's less available to heal. And if you're sleeping poorly and you're not getting enough time in a resting state, now there's even less time to use those resources to your benefit. So optimizing those systems can play a huge role. And the gut, the immune system, you know, when it's over inflamed, when it's overstimulated, it can cause things like a histamine response where, we have increased inflammation and allergies or sensitivities to different things, be it food or, environmental issues. And people forget that that is a source of inflammation. So
Yeah.
allergies and, sensitivities creates its own inflammation. Um, and that can even get into our joints and be an additional source of inflammation. Um,
Yeah.
and it's a closed system. I'll use a personal example actually of my grandmother, who I'm trying to help navigate her health journey at the moment. She's 93 years young. um,
For her. Awesome.
but she has been dealing with a knee issue, which is minimal. She has some arthritis, and a lot of it has healed. Um, but she has this stubborn inflammation and pain in that area, that we're starting to realize is not orthopedic. It's coming from systemic inflammatory processes. Um, she, you know, I did some treatments on her. She got a lot better. Didn't get to see her for a little while. She ended up getting a cortisone injection, with which we'll get to another day, but I'm not a fan of them.
Okay.
There's many reasons for that. But instead of the cortisone injection helping, which ordinarily it would with an orthopedic issue, it actually made her worse and it triggered this histamine response. So she had previously had this sort of inflammatory skin itching type condition several years ago. We were able to get that to calm down, and she was better. And then this cortisone injection reinvigorated. It came back. Now she's getting the itching again.
Oh, awful. Jeez.
And what it really signifies is, cortisone or steroids, in addition to them being anti-inflammatory, they're also stimulators. They're a stimulant. So this increased the activity of her nervous system, and it set off this inflammatory response. So now we've realized, okay, the pain and even just the inflammation that she has in her body, it's not from the joint, it's from the system having excess inflammation, and more of the inflammation settled in the joint because the joint is the most susceptible. It's, a prior injury. It's going to light up more than say other areas.
Wow. Okay, so let's talk about that again. So inflammation. So you mean cellular inflammation? Is that what
Or
you're
even just like like body inflammation.
body? Okay.
Hmm.
Okay. Now, do you ever run? Because I get this test like twice. I get labs done twice a year, and one of them is HSCRP,
Hmm.
C-reactive protein. Is that a? Can we explain what that is, and do you use that in patients too?
Yeah, absolutely. No, so it's just a measure of the body's inflammation, and reactivity. But the thing is that all of this needs to be done, in conjunction with
Sure.
just understanding how the person's body works as a whole.
Yeah.
Because, well, the majority of lab work, is they're snapshots in time. So you
Yeah.
could be at, say, a low point in inflammation, when you get the labs drawn, but then, like 3 days later, you're at a high point and your labs will be totally different. Um, but I think it's important to do these baseline labs and to track things, because they do pick up big changes. or if there's something that really is going on. I just think it's important to look at everything as a whole
I
also.
agree. Yeah. So if someone listening has chronic pain right now and they feel stuck, like what advice do you have for them? Where should they start?
I think, the first thing to do is really to like get all of your history of that issue together. Try to get a concrete story of like where it started, what treatments you've tried, what worked, what didn't work. And then, keeping, like a pain journal or a diary,
Really?
tracking
Yeah.
it, and trying to understand if there are any patterns to it. And sometimes there aren't, and sometimes there
Mhm.
are. But the interesting thing about patterns actually is that there, the lack of a pattern is a pattern. Um, so, if we think about orthopedic pain, um, a joint pain, a joint issue, let's say, you know, a meniscus issue in the knee, it has a very consistent pattern. Certain activities bother the knee, certain activities don't. Rest makes it feel better. There's your pattern. Other things have less or no pattern. Nerve pain. I like to say that like nerve symptoms are consistently inconsistent. They don't seem to have a pattern. Some days they bother you, some days they don't. Sometimes you can do a lot of activity and it doesn't bother you, and then the next day it hurts for no reason. But that helps us determine that it could be a nerve issue. I was just talking to someone the other day about one of the things that I will see sometimes is speaking of the foot, you mentioned your friend who's
Yeah.
a foot specialist. So some cases of plantar fasciitis or heel pain actually stem from the spine.
Mhm.
We can have a pinched nerve in our L5S1, so the lowest level of our lower back, our lumbar spine, and that is causing pain in the foot. And believe it or not, in some people, they will have no lower back pain, no lower back symptoms, and the only symptom is pain in the foot. And these are the frustrated patients because they see several foot
Yeah.
specialists. Sometimes they will have a cortisone shot in the foot, which is incredibly painful. None of which is helping at all because it's not treating the source of the symptoms. But something
Yeah.
like a pain journal would be very helpful in elucidating that because the spine is more sensitive to things like static loading, so prolonged sitting, prolonged standing, things like that,
Mhm.
whereas the foot is more sensitive to activity and weight bearing. So, if someone had, say, a plantar fasciitis that was coming from the back, they might say, it bothers me when I sit for a long period of time. Well, that doesn't fit with regular plantar fasciitis from the foot. Typically, sitting would actually make the foot feel better. So that already gets us thinking pattern wise, okay, maybe this isn't a foot issue. Maybe there's something else going on. So just by doing that, you can really like kind of become your own detective. And I feel like,
Yeah.
when I listened to your story, you did a lot of that yourself. You compiled information, you started tracking things you had going on, and all of that's really helpful in terms of helping you get to the answer of what the source is.
I think it's helpful for the doctor that you're going to see too. If you can go in there with information and you can specifically point to maybe patterns that you recognize, like you just mentioned, or just recurring symptoms, or, every
Absolutely.
morning I notice this, or this time of day, this happens. I think it's helpful for the practitioner
Yeah.
on the other
Yeah, I
side.
have
Mhm.
a colleague of mine that I, studied functional medicine with, and she had this saying. She used to say, the mystery is in the history."
Yeah. Oh my God. I love that. I love that. So yeah, and I love that you draw on the functional medicine side of things too. So do you, Dr. Sean, do you get involved like with hormones? Do you ever you test for that? Like
Mhm.
again, I know it's going to depend on the patient, but depending on what they're presenting with. So do you look at
Absolutely.
thyroid and all those things too?
Yes. No,
Yeah.
we do screenings for all of those things.
Okay.
And if it's playing a role, certainly that's something we work on. Typically my colleagues will do more of the hormone related stuff. I tend to focus on, the orthopedics and pain and nerve issues.
Yeah.
But that's all, within the plan, because you're absolutely right. If there is a hormonal imbalance, if the system is working improperly, that's certainly going to detract from any positive outcomes that we would have.
Yeah, and the hormones themselves are chemical messengers, right? So they're back
That's
to
right.
that sort of, the electric, bioelectric signaling and things. It fascinates me really, just how the body, just how it all works together. It's really
No,
cool.
it's there's this neurobiologist, his name's Dr. Michael Levin, he's out of Columbia, and he has essentially proven that, that these genetics signals of expression are bioelectric, where he was able to like create bioelectric signals and cause frogs to generate multiple eyes and
Oh wow.
multiple legs and other, various species just by the induction of a signal. And we've realized our bodies work the same way.
Yeah.
Um, and giving it the right signals can really move us to the correct path. Um, and yeah, if there's a hormonal imbalance, then that it's going to affect what types of signals or how much signals are going to be transferred. So we really do need to make sure that we're addressing that first and foremost.
Yeah, and I'm sure you probably also do you work with patients of all ages? And you
Yeah,
probably, if it's a female, you probably have to take into consideration where she is because they could be in perimenopause, menopause. I'm sure that plays a bit of a role too with some patients.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, and if we think that that's, factoring into any of their symptoms, then, it's vital to make sure that they get the appropriate treatment and labs for that.
Now, Dr. Sean, can you work with people remotely, or is this? I know you're located in Connecticut. Do you work strictly with patients in person? How does that work?
So I like to do in-person appointments initially, just so I can get to know a person, do physical examination, and then we can continue with some remote work for maintenance. But there's a lot of things that really need a hands-on approach, especially when we come to
Yeah.
the body comes to the body, and I'm all for, I think there's certainly a convenience and, better access when it comes to, like, remote treatments, but there are just some things that need to be done in person. Even the electrical signals, like, there are ways to send electrical signals, um, from the perspective of remote signaling. But we know from, decades of research that the signal isn't as strong if it's done remotely as opposed to if it's done in person. Um, that being said, something's always better than nothing. I would love to help get people on the right path no matter what. Um, and, if patients are on the other side of the country and they don't have a way to see me, I certainly make, a full intent to try to find them the right providers in their area, and to coordinate so that they get the right care.
Oh, that's excellent. So, Dr. Sean, I'm going to put all of your information in the show notes, but how can people get in touch with you? And is there anything else you'd like to share before we end the interview today?
So, best way to get in touch with me is through my social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. And then to find out more information, I have a lot of really good content and information about myself on my website, www.drshawnaltman.com. And as I said earlier, you are the medicine. So if you're someone struggling with chronic pain, or, lots of different issues where traditional medicine is not able to give you the answers, um, please reach out and I would be happy to help you in that process because I've been there and I know what it's like.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, like I think I mentioned this earlier, maybe when we were offline, but I've done several interviews with people that are suffering with chronic pain that have turned to kratom, which kratom itself is very legitimate. It's a plant, but now they're all fighting because these local and state governments are trying to outlaw it. And after speaking with you, I'm like, how much better? Like, let's just address the root cause,
Hmm.
and then you don't have to worry about the chronic pain. But the numbers they gave me were staggering. The amount of people that are dealing with chronic pain these days in the United States alone. So I definitely encourage everyone listening to this interview to reach out to you. I loved your patient testimonials, and it was great. I mean, somebody talked about their neck, somebody talked about, I think it was her elbow, like that you had a variety of ailments that you were able to fix in these people, in these patients, and pretty incredible. So I encourage everybody to go to your website and check that out.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Sure. Well, Dr. Sean, thanks for joining me, and I'm sure I'm going to be bringing you back again in the
That would be
future.
lovely. I'd love
Love
to
to.
come back.
Sounds great. Well, thank you so much for all you do.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Have a great day.
Hi, I'm Dr. Liz. I just want to tell you how amazing and easy it was to work with Daria on my book. You see, I've had a book for a while, been sitting on my desk, sitting on my computer. Maybe you might be able to relate to that. And I didn't know what to do, how to take it to the next step, how to make it look polished and edited and easy and useful for my readers. Met with Daria. We had some great conversations. She learned my voice, my goal, my style, and she was able to edit and give me feedback on how to make my message clearer, more focused, polished, and it worked. I have a book. In fact, I have a book and a workbook that she's edited for me and guided me along the pathway. So if you're maybe a little bit like me, that you have a book or you have an idea and you haven't known where to take it, how to take it to the next stage, reach out to Daria. She's a game changer and she's really easy to work with and takes great pride in her work as well. So join me in the published author arena. Reach out to Daria. I'm Dr. Liz.